In the summer of 1944, an American tank crew in Normandy spotted a German Tiger tank moving through the hedgerows about 800 yards away. The Sherman commander ordered his gunner to fire. The 75 bumper shell hit the Tiger's front armor and bounced off like a tennis ball hitting a brick wall. The Tiger's turret slowly turned toward the Sherman. The American crew watched in horror as the massive 80 millimeter gun lined up on their position. They had time to fire two more rounds. Both bounced off. Then the Tiger fired once. The Sherman exploded. All five crew members were killed instantly. This scene repeated itself hundreds of times across the battlefields of Europe. American tankers called the Sherman a death trap. They called it a Ronson after the cigarette lighter because it lit up every time. They watched their friends burn alive inside tanks that could not penetrate German armor and could not survive German guns. The question that haunted every Sherman crew was simple. Why were they being sent into battle with tanks that could not win? The answer involves one of the most controversial decisions of World War II. It is a story of engineering, logistics, and the cold mathematics of industrial warfare. It is the story of the Tiger versus the Sherman, and why the tank that won the war was not the tank that won the battles. The German Tiger tank was a monster. It weighed 57 tons. Its frontal armor was over 4 inches thick, sloped and hardened to deflect shells. Its 80 millimeter gun was the most powerful tank weapon of the war, capable of destroying any Allied vehicle at ranges exceeding 2,000 yards. When the Tiger first appeared on the battlefields of North Africa in late 1942, it shocked the Allies. Nothing in their arsenal could stop it. British and American tanks fired shell after shell at Tigers, only to watch them bounce harmlessly away. Meanwhile, the Tiger's gun could destroy Allied tanks at distances where they could not even hope to fight back. The psychological impact was enormous. Allied tankers developed what came to be called Tiger fear. They would report seeing Tigers everywhere, even when the tanks they faced were actually less formidable German vehicles. The mere rumor that Tigers were in the area could slow an entire advance. German propaganda made the most of this fear. Newsreels showed Tigers crushing enemy tanks. Magazines published photographs of the massive vehicles rolling through conquered territory. The Tiger became a symbol of German technological superiority, proof that German engineering was the best in the world. And in many ways, the propaganda was accurate. The Tiger was a marvel of engineering. Its combination of armor, firepower, and precision manufacturing made it the most formidable tank of the war. In a one-on-one engagement, a Tiger could defeat virtually any Allied tank it faced. But the Tiger had weaknesses that German propaganda never mentioned. The Tiger was enormously expensive to produce. Each tank required over 300,000 man-hours to build. The precision manufacturing that made the Tiger so formidable also made it difficult and slow to produce. Germany's entire industrial output could only manage about 50 Tigers per month at peak production. The Tiger was also mechanically unreliable. Its complex transmission and suspension systems broke down frequently. Moving a Tiger division across country required an enormous logistics train of spare parts, fuel, and maintenance crews. Many Tigers were lost not to enemy action, but to mechanical failures that left them stranded. And the Tiger was heavy. At 57 tons, it could not cross most bridges. It consumed fuel at a prodigious rate. Moving Tigers by rail required special flat cars and careful planning. The very characteristics that made the Tiger powerful in combat made it a logistical nightmare outside of combat. The American Sherman was everything the Tiger was not. The M4 Sherman weighed only 33 tons. Its armor was thinner, typically around 2.5 inches on the front. Its 75 millimeter gun was adequate against earlier German tanks, but could not penetrate the Tiger's frontal armor at any combat range. On paper, the Sherman looked hopelessly outmatched, and in many ways it was. A Sherman crew facing a Tiger in open terrain had almost no chance of survival unless they could somehow get around to the Tiger's weaker side or rear armor. But the Sherman had advantages that did not show up in simple comparisons of armor thickness and gun caliber. The Sherman was cheap and easy to produce. American factories could build a Sherman in about 10,000 man-hours, a fraction of the time required for a Tiger. This meant that for every Tiger Germany produced, America could produce nearly 30 Shermans. The Sherman was mechanically reliable. Its engine and transmission were based on proven automotive technology. Spare parts were plentiful. Crew members could perform most repairs in the field without specialized equipment. A Sherman division could cover ground that would leave a Tiger division broken down on the roadside. The Sherman was also lighter and more mobile. It could cross bridges that would collapse under a Tiger. It could maneuver through terrain that would bog down heavier vehicles. It could be transported more easily by ship, by rail, and by road. And crucially, the Sherman was designed to be operated by ordinary soldiers with minimal training. American crews could learn to drive and fight a Sherman in weeks. German Tiger crews required months of specialized training to master their complex vehicle. The question of whether to build better tanks or more tanks divided American military planners throughout the war. Some officers argued that American tankers deserved the best equipment possible. They wanted heavier tanks with bigger guns and thicker armor. They pointed to the casualties being suffered by Sherman crews and demanded that something be done. Others argued that the Sherman was good enough. They noted that the war would be won by logistics, not by individual tank duels. What mattered was getting tanks to the battlefield in large numbers, keeping them running, and replacing them when they were destroyed. The Sherman excelled at all of these things. The man most associated with the decision to stick with the Sherman was Lieutenant General Leslie McNair, commander of Army Ground Forces. McNair believed that tanks should not fight other tanks. That job belonged to specialized tank destroyers with bigger guns. Tanks were for exploiting breakthroughs and supporting infantry. They did not need to match the Tiger because they were not supposed to fight Tigers. This doctrine looked good on paper. In practice, it often fell apart. Tank destroyers were not always available when Shermans encountered Tigers. The battlefield did not follow neat organizational charts. American tank crews found themselves facing Tigers, whether doctrine said they should or not. The result was a compromise that satisfied no one. American tankers got a weapon that was adequate for its intended role, but dangerous in the role they often found themselves performing. They won their battles through numbers, tactics, and sheer determination, rather than through technological superiority. The mathematics of attrition ultimately favored the Allies. Germany produced about 1,350 Tiger tanks during the entire war. They also produced about 480 of the even heavier Tiger II, or King Tiger. Combined, fewer than 2,000 of these fearsome vehicles ever reached the battlefield. America produced over 49,000 Sherman tanks. Britain produced additional thousands. The Soviet Union contributed tens of thousands of T-34s, tanks that had their own advantages over German armor. Every Tiger destroyed was almost irreplaceable. German factories could not keep pace with losses. Trained crews were even harder to replace than the tanks themselves. As the war continued, German armored units became shadows of their former strength, their remaining Tigers broken down or waiting for parts that never came. Every Sherman destroyed was replaced within weeks. American factories worked around the clock, pouring out tanks faster than the Germans could destroy them. New crews arrived in a constant stream. The supply of spare parts never faltered. The German tankers won many battles. They destroyed Shermans at ratios that should have been unsustainable. But they lost the war because they could not replace their losses while the Allies could. The human cost of this strategy fell on the Sherman crews. American tankers knew they were going into battle with inferior equipment. They knew their armor could not protect them. They knew their guns could not penetrate the enemy. They went anyway because that was their job. They developed tactics to compensate for their disadvantages. They learned to use terrain for cover. They learned to maneuver around enemy tanks to hit the weaker side armor. They learned to work in teams, sacrificing some tanks to distract the enemy while others moved into position for flank shots. They learned that numbers mattered more than firepower. If 5 Shermans attacked one Tiger, the Tiger might destroy 3 or 4 of them. But the surviving Shermans would get around behind the Tiger and destroy it. The exchange rate was terrible, but it was sustainable. Some Sherman crews added improvised armor to their tanks. They welded spare track links to the hull. They piled sandbags around the turret. They bolted on steel plates scavenged from destroyed vehicles. These modifications provided minimal additional protection, but they gave the crews a psychological sense that they were doing something to improve their odds. The Army eventually produced upgraded versions of the Sherman with better guns and thicker armor. The M4A3E8, nicknamed the Easy 8, mounted a 70-86 millimeter gun that could penetrate Tiger armor at moderate ranges. The British modified some Shermans to carry a 17-pounder gun that was even more effective. These Firefly variants became priority targets for German tankers who quickly learned to identify and destroy them first. But even the improved Shermans were not equal to the Tiger in a straight fight. American crews continued to rely on tactics, numbers, and support from other arms to defeat German armor. The debate over the Sherman continues among historians to this day. Critics argue that the United States could have produced better tanks without sacrificing quantity. They point to the M26 Pershing, a heavy tank with a 90 millimeter gun and thick armor that was developed during the war, but only reached combat in small numbers in 1945. If the Pershing had been prioritized earlier, they argue, thousands of American tankers might have survived. Defenders of the Sherman point to logistics. The Pershing was heavier, more complex, and harder to maintain. Rushing it into production would have disrupted the supply chains that kept existing tanks running. The Shermans were already in the factories, already being shipped, already being crewed. Switching production would have created chaos at the worst possible time. There is also the question of whether American tankers actually faced Tigers as often as memory suggests. The Tiger was rare. Most German tanks encountered by American forces were Panzer IVs and Panthers, vehicles that the Sherman could fight with better odds. The Tiger loomed larger in memory than it did in actual combat statistics, but statistics were cold comfort to the crews who did face Tigers. For them, one Tiger was one too many when their tank could not fight back. The story of Tiger versus Sherman is ultimately a story about different philosophies of war. Germany built weapons for warriors. Their tanks were designed for skilled crews to dominate battlefields through superior technology. Each Tiger was a masterpiece, capable of destroying dozens of enemy vehicles if properly employed. America built weapons for soldiers. Their tanks were designed for average crews to contribute effectively to a massive combined arms effort. Each Sherman was a tool, not a masterpiece, but there were enough tools to get the job done. The German approach produced spectacular individual victories. Tiger aces accumulated kill counts that seem almost unbelievable. A single Tiger commander, Kurt Knispel, was credited with destroying over 160 enemy tanks. Michael Whitman destroyed over 130. These men became legends. The American approach produced no such legends. There were no Sherman aces with hundreds of kills. The victories were collective, anonymous, achieved through overwhelming numbers rather than individual brilliance. But the American approach won the war. When historians assess the Sherman today, they generally acknowledge that it was the right tank for America to build. It was not the best tank of the war. It was not the tank that American crews deserved. But it was the tank that American industry could produce in numbers that overwhelmed German resistance. The Sherman crews who died because their tanks could not match German armor were sacrificed on the altar of industrial strategy. They paid the price for a decision made far from the battlefield by men who understood logistics better then they understood the terror of facing a tiger with an inadequate gun. Whether that sacrifice was necessary remains debated. Whether it was justified depends on how you weigh individual lives against strategic outcomes. These are questions without easy answers. What is certain is that the men who crewed Shermans were among the bravest of the war. They climbed into tanks they knew were inferior. They drove toward enemies they knew could destroy them. They did their jobs despite the odds, and enough of them survived to help win the war. The Tiger was the better tank. The Sherman was the winning tank. The difference between those two things contains multitudes. When German tank commander Otto Carius was asked after the war about the Sherman, he gave a telling answer. He said that one Sherman was easy prey. 5 Shermans were a problem, and there were always 5 Shermans. That was the story of the war in a single observation. German quality met American quantity, and quantity won. The Sherman crews who made that victory possible deserve to be remembered not as men who fought in inferior tanks, but as men who won despite fighting in inferior tanks. They found ways to beat an enemy that should have beaten them. They adapted, improvised, and persevered. They did not have the best equipment. They had enough equipment, and they made it count. If you want to hear more stories like this, consider subscribing to the channel. We uncover the untold stories of World War II, the ones that history books left out. See you in the next video.